The conservation of Korean mother of pearl has not been well developed nor studied outside of Korea. It is exciting that the exhibition presents the conservation process of 4 mother of pearl lacquers from the Asian Art Museum collection.
So the goals in our conservation process were threefold. First, to perform extensive analysis and examination of the objects. Here we wanted to add to the body of knowledge about late Joseon Dynasty Korean lacquerware, because there isn't much out there, and we wanted to help inform our treatment steps. To this end, we started out by analyzing each piece visually.
So the objects in our study here involved lacquer, ray skin, mother pearl, tortoiseshell, metal wires, and metal flakes on each object. This table has a number of large cracks running through it, which are going to give us the opportunity to take some nice samples. With a cross-section sample, we can prepare it and put it under the microscope and see the different layers of the surface. We're examining the cross-section. We want to be able to distinguish between original material and anything that was added after the object was made. The thick yellow layer appears to be original and I think was probably put on there to keep the wires shiny. The layer over that is some later coating. We wouldn't mind removing that layer coating, especially if it's interfering with the look of the object now. But before we removed anything, we'd have to think very carefully about why it's there, what it's doing to the appearance of the object, because we want the object to look as much like it did originally as possible.
In addition to looking at the object under normal light, we always look at them under ultraviolet radiation. So this swath of light green is unexpected. It is a different coating from the rest of the surface. This means possibly a repair campaign along this crack.
Now that we've looked at this table with visible light, UV light, and under the microscope, we're interested to see more details about how it was constructed, and for that we're going to use X-rays. We can see most of the nails are coming from the top down, but then this nail was put in from the bottom up, and it's probably a repair. This nail also is coming in from the end, and probably is not original. This is the X-ray fluorescence spectrometer, or XRF. We use it to identify the elements in the object. Here we're looking at this squiggly wire on the screen because we're interested to know whether it's gold, which it looks like, or whether it's maybe gilded brass, copper, bronze, whatever. It takes about a minute. It's not gold wire, it's copper and zinc. There is some gold involved here, it looks like. Possibly that wire might have a fine gold plating on it, and that pretty much covers it.
So the second goal was to stabilize the object. So there was quite a lot of lifting inlay material, so lifting lacquer, lifting wire, lifting mother of pearl, lifting ray skin. The idea being that once those are secured, the object can be exhibited safely and stored safely without further risk of loss. The final goal was to make aesthetic compensations for losses in the inlay materials and the lacquer. We wanted the overall pattern to be legible again and not distracting at all to the viewer.
In general, in conservation, when we're making replacement parts, we like to make them reversible because it could well be that in the future someone will come up with a better answer. The other thing that we want to make sure of is that the materials that we use for replacement parts are readily identifiable as such. And while they should not be obvious from any distance, close up, if you know what you're looking for, you should be able to tell which parts are original and which parts are replacements, so that scholars in the future, for example, won't be fooled by our work and take it to be original. The treatments of the 4 objects were actually fairly similar.
For several of the inlay materials, I had to come up with creative fills. So, for example, the horn, I used a thick mylar, so I'm not using an original horn material, but something that looks very much like it. Then another recently developed technique was to create fills for lacquer using cast pieces of acrylic film. We're using acrylic paint match to the color of the loss. And once it dries, you get this nice flexible piece that you can then cut to the shape of your loss, place it in there, and then you have a removable fill. There were pre-existing fills around some of the top surface of the round table, but they were lacking the small golden flakes that the rest of the surface has.
So we put a little adhesive on each of those areas, and then we're using a piece of bamboo tube with a very fine net put over the end to disperse very fine golden mica powder onto the adhesive so to make a match with the original.
So the most challenging aspect of the process was to create a fill material for the ray skin losses. And this was a big problem because each area of loss had different scale size, subtle differences in color plus texture, and it was incredibly thin. So what to put in place here?
We first decided that using more ray skin was probably not a good idea because of its lack of availability, but also because you don't want to use a material which can be mistaken for the original. Then, of course, the ray skin is not just a flat blank color. You've got these circles, which represent the knobs on the surface of the skin. When we thought about that, we realized that the best way to reproduce that texture was to use some kind of a circular punch to press circles into the paper. We remembered that in the closet we had some very old glass syringes and needles from 40, 50 years ago. So the perfect tool to impress these little dots on the paper. It's a good thing we saved them for these 50 years, isn't it?
I ended up using the metal syringe tips with different diameter to create the circular scales, outlining those with a pen, then adding some gloss, adhering this in place, and then burnishing it further to enhance the gloss.
It's pretty common in conservation that we find tools from other areas that we use. Not a lot of tools are made specifically for conservation, and you have these needs for some odd little thing that you just have to fish around and find the right object to do the job.
The other technique that was slightly unusual was to use the wax resin to fill hairline cracks in the lacquer losses. Wax resin fills are typically used in paintings conservation, so to use them here in an object is slightly different, but a good choice for filling this very tiny crack. In order to replace the lost wire, we purchased new wire from the hardware store, and then I bent it to match the shape, and then adhered it in place, and then had to tone it so that it didn't look like new wire. Okay, on the 12-sided table, one leg was missing a foot, so I took a mold of an existing foot, then cast a new foot, carved it down to fit exactly, and then adhered it in place and painted it to match.
And then once all the replacement parts were put on, it was mainly a matter of toning all those replacement bits so that they matched visually, and then bringing up the gloss, doing a little bit of polishing, cleaning, to get them to look as good as they could. Well, it's always rewarding when you're finished with the treatment to step back and see how much better the piece looks afterwards than before. But in fact, I really enjoy the analysis. I like looking at the objects and examining them closely to figure out what they're made of and how they're made. That somehow gives me the feeling that I have some kind of view into the eye and the mind of the craftsman who made it originally.